The first topic of today is focusing in on the Middle East, the recent ground invasion of Israel into southern Lebanon. The rocket attacks are on Israel from Iran, and some of the things happening behind the scenes which have led to these linked events. Joining us on the program now is Jeffrey Miller. He is a geopolitical analyst for the Democracy Project. Kia ora, Jeffrey. Thank you for your time today.
Good morning, Andrew.
This is a complicated situation, and for a lot of people, it's difficult to know who the key players are. Firstly, let's talk about Hezbollah. Now, this is the target of Israel's attacks over the last few weeks, be it exploding pages, rocket attacks, or now a ground invasion. But who is Hezbollah, Jeffrey?
Look, Hezbollah is a non-state group, but it has much in common with the state in terms of just how well equipped and armed it is. The Lebanese state itself is very, very weak, and Hezbollah takes on a lot of the functions of a state, and certainly in terms of its armed capabilities. There's somewhere around 50,000 fighters for Hezbollah in Lebanon, 150,000 rockets is the estimate that comes from Israeli intelligence sources primarily. And Hezbollah was established in 1982 during the Lebanese Civil War that went on from 1975 to 1990. It was established in 1982 to respond to an Israeli invasion of Lebanon, much as what you're seeing now.
Yeah.
So it was a direct product of that Israeli invasion back in 1982, and Hezbollah is a direct client of Iran. It's a Shia group, unlike Hamas, which is a Sunni group.
Yeah.
So the links are closer with Iran, post-Islamic Revolution Iran, and the funding, the weapons, pretty much all the resources that Hezbollah has really do emanate ultimately from Iran. I mean, there are some other sources as well, but look, the bulk of it is coming out of Tehran, and the founding charter is very much about the destruction of Israel. So Hezbollah doesn't really make any secret about what their ultimate aims are. That's why Israel is obviously very much against Hezbollah, and why they've taken the actions that they have done in the past couple of weeks. As you mentioned, the pager attacks, the walkie-talkie attacks, the killing of the leadership, including the leader Hassan Nasrallah, who's been the leader of Hezbollah for 32 years. I mean, each one of those actions in its own has been breathtaking, and it's all come at once. So we've moved away from any talk of a ceasefire. There was talk of a 21-day ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, and that's just simply off the table now. And Iran responded with those 180 ballistic missiles into Israel.
Yeah.
We're now awaiting the Israeli response. So that's the picture we're up to now, a year on almost from the beginning of the war in Gaza on October the 7th.
Now, I suppose doing a comparison between Hezbollah and Hamas, I mean, Hamas, I suppose, has the difference where they're not just effectively the government in Gaza, they are the actual government. Both organizations recognized as terrorist groups, but if anything, Hezbollah has more resources, more equipment, a more viable force in some ways.
Indeed. Look, Hezbollah is much better resourced than Hamas. And those figures I gave you just give you an indication of their strength. They're better equipped than a lot of state militaries are in the Middle East. And so they're a different level. They're a different kettle of fish than Hamas. And yet Hamas has done an awful lot of damage, as we've seen, as we saw on October the 7th.
Yeah.
Hamas wasn't that badly equipped either. But, in Israel's calculations, Hezbollah was always the greater threat. And in fact, that's often cited as the reason why Israel was taken by surprise by Hamas. They thought Hamas was a bit of a paper tiger. They were focused on their northern border with Lebanon, and Israeli intelligence missed what was happening in Gaza.
Yeah.
So, the Israeli public tend to see generally Lebanon and Hezbollah as the greater threat. And Israeli public support is really strong for this campaign now in the north. There was a poll out the other day in Israel that showed 80% support for conducting this operation against Lebanon. And Benjamin Netanyahu's really been shored up in his support. He's at a high point now versus the low point just under a year ago
Yeah.
after those attacks by Hamas. There was a huge amount of criticism of Netanyahu and the security forces, the intelligence services, and the sentiment in Israel now seems to be, well, they've redeemed themselves with what's been happening with Hezbollah, the fact that they've managed to conduct these pager and walkie-talkie attacks, kill off the leadership of Hezbollah. It's quite spectacular. Whatever you think of the long-term efficacy of all of this, and
Yeah.
I have my deep reservations on it, but there's no doubt it is spectacular. And to kill off these figures like Hassan Nasrallah and the whole number of commanders, it does suggest very good intelligence on the Israeli
It
side.
certainly has been very effective and like you say, impressive that Israel has been able to these precision attacks, taking out key commanders and leaders in Hezbollah. Some would say, though, that this is deliberate provocation, that that peace is definitely off the table because of the specific targeted attacks that Israel has decided to make. Yes, it is a terrorist group, taking nothing away from the fact that Israel is defending itself from an organization which, in its founding document, wants to see Israel eradicated. However, it seems that Hezbollah and Iran, to an extent, have been pushed and pushed and pushed from Israel, that the response that we saw, the missile attacks, in some ways were inevitable given the consistent provocation from Israel. What's your thoughts?
Yes. Look, it's just been one thing after another, hasn't it? Since the summer over there. And I think the last time I joined you, we were talking about the killing of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh
Yeah.
in Tehran, the killing of Hezbollah commander Fuad Shukr back at the end of July. I think if you look at the Israeli point of view, it's quite different to ours. And the outsider's point of view, Benjamin Netanyahu has made total victory the goal in Gaza.
Yeah.
And until every last trace of Hamas is removed, the war's not over. And that strategy seems to be being applied now to Lebanon, till every trace of Hezbollah's leadership and then Hezbollah's forces, at least in the south of Lebanon, are eradicated.
Yeah.
We're talking about 30 kilometers that separates the Israeli border from the Litani River in southern Lebanon. Until those forces are eradicated, the war's not over. Why is that significant? Well, you've got about 60,000 Israelis who've left their homes, evacuated their homes in the north of Israel because of the constant rocket fire coming across the border from Hezbollah fighters. So that's why that Israel wants to create what they see as a buffer zone in the south of Lebanon. I think they'd be keen to eradicate even more of Hezbollah than that, and that's why you're seeing all these strikes on Beirut.
Yep.
It's about the leadership of Hezbollah and their nerve centers, if you like, their command and control centers, which are based really in Beirut. But then it's also about the rank and file forces in the southern part of Lebanon that pose a direct threat to Israeli civilians who live in the towns and villages near the Israeli-Lebanese border, so living in the north of Israel. So I think that's the calculations. In the end, though, it is a very dangerous game when we've had now the second exchange of direct fire between Israel and Iran. And this, until April, when we had the first round of this had never happened before since the Islamic Revolution. You'd never had a direct strike by Iran on Israel. Now you've had two. You've had direct reprisal from Israel back in April. We're awaiting the response now. Israel is promising something even bigger than back in April. And there's been a clamour by some in Israel, including the former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, to target nuclear facilities. Joe Biden has said, no, we're not doing that. And so I think it's probably unlikely that Israel will try and do something as
having said that, though, the Israel government has ignored America's pleas for a ceasefire in Gaza. and we're looking definitely at having a change of regime in the United States within the next month.
And that is also very true that Israel has been very much impervious to American wishes over the past few months, and Anthony Blinken has been made a fool of
yeah,
in some ways by Israel. Blinken spent months doing the shuttle diplomacy, trying to get a ceasefire in Gaza. We've hardly talked about Gaza, and yet that war's still raging. And he tried also to get a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon
yeah,
just a couple of weeks ago when the General Assembly was meeting, and that seemed actually quite viable. A 21-day ceasefire was actually quite realistic.
hmm
And then the day after, that all collapsed because Israel targeted Hassan Nasrallah.
yeah,
So we go from bad to worse to even worse in this situation. In my view, we need to speak up for peace here and
yeah,
de-escalation. And if the last year has taught us anything, it is that escalation only gives us more escalation. And each month, the situation has got bleaker and bleaker. And in the end, civilians are the ones paying the price. We've had 2,000 people in Lebanon have been killed over the last
yeah,
year, a good thousand of those in the last couple of weeks. So that's more already over the last year than we saw killed in the 2006 war,
yeah.
declared war between Israel and Hezbollah. So things are just terrible for civilians. 42,000 killed in Gaza. Most of those are civilians, and most of those civilians are, or a large number, are women and children.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very bleak picture that we're looking at. And I just think we have to keep speaking up for peace, diplomacy. I just don't believe there's a military solution ultimately to what we're seeing here. And I just disagree with that total victory strategy, because I think a bit like a plant, you can rip out all the plant and then it will regrow. And
Yeah.
that's what I think will happen with Hezbollah and Hamas as well. You kill off the leadership, kill off the fighters, there'll be plenty more, because there's just going to be so much resentment at the destruction that is being created here.
Certainly, that is what we've seen with the last Israel invasion of Lebanon. In some ways, that created Hezbollah. And the plant has grown stronger, to use your metaphor. And just seeing some startling images as Iran was bombing Israel, there was celebration in the streets in the West Bank and in Lebanon and in other parts of the world. That despite I suppose Israel's relative strength in this region, there'll be a new generation of people wanting to push back. If anything, the strongman tactics of Israel is making their enemies stronger, do you think?
Look, sadly, this will just create a new generation of resentment in the end, and hatred towards Israel. I don't know what the solution is, as I said off air to you,
Yeah,
Andrew. There is no silver bullet. There is no simple solution to what we're seeing here. And when my analysis, I never want to excuse the actions of Hamas.
yeah,
What they did last October the 7th was absolutely shocking, was inexcusable. The killing of 1,200 Israeli civilians, the capture of 251 hostages. I don't want to excuse the actions of Hezbollah that have been firing rockets targeting civilians since October the 8th last year.
yeah,
There's nothing really good about either of those organizations at all. And we shouldn't shed a tear for Hassan Nasrallah personally, but we should shed a tear for the thousands of civilians in Lebanon, Gaza, who have been killed and elsewhere throughout the Middle East as a result of this war and this constant escalation. And it's for them that we should be working on political solution, de-escalation, and still trying to get that ceasefire. I think it's tempting sometimes to throw up our hands and say there's no answer to the Middle East and we should just not get involved. But I think when it comes to New Zealanders and the New Zealand government, we have to be part of the solution, because this situation goes from bad to worse. That is going to affect us. New Zealand has troops stationed in the Middle East. It's a small number,
yeah.
but believe me, if this situation gets worse, that number could increase as well. So we have skin in the game, and just from a moral point of view, we absolutely have to do more. And Winston Peters, as the foreign minister, has talked about the need to do more. I think personally, Winston Peters needs to get to the Middle East, not to the war zone itself, but
Yeah.
he needs to visit our partners and friends in the region, like in the Gulf states, and get the views of those who are on the ground there in the region, and work out, what New Zealand could do to contribute to a political solution. I don't think we're too small to play a role in this overarching political solution. No, not single-handedly. We're not going to resolve the the wars and the escalation that has been going on for decades, but we can play our part. And I think that's something that I would encourage the New Zealand government to do more of. New Zealand has been quite good at issuing statements,
Yep.
and Winston Peters issued another statement this week. Christopher Luxon did as well, condemning the Iranian strikes on Israel and calling for de-escalation. Winston Peters spoke at the UN, calling for de-escalation. But I think we have to do more than just call for it. We
Yep.
have to actually be part of the solution.
Yeah, and certainly diplomatic moves. And I know for a lot of people listening to this conversation at the moment, the importance to pray for the people of Israel, but also for the people of Gaza, the people of Lebanon as well. A heartbreaking situation unfolding in that part of the world at the moment. Jeffrey, thank you so much for the work that you do and for your insight and analysis on this issue. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Andrew.